They told him he would command no more. No defeat, no scandal, just a message from the Caliph. Brief, final, and clear. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the undefeated general of Islam, was being relieved of command. Outside, the soldiers who had followed him through deserts, sieges, and battles where the odds made no sense, waited in silence. They loved him for his calm, his courage, and the quiet certainty that wherever he led, they would not fail. When the news spread, disbelief moved through the camp. Some whispered that it made no sense, not in the middle of war. Others stayed silent, knowing the Caliph's word was final. Their hearts were torn between two men they trusted, the one who had led them and the one who now commanded them both. Then Khalid stepped out of his tent. No anger, no defiance, just calm. What he did next would surprise everyone and be remembered for centuries. Before belief, there was rivalry, the kind that runs through a city where every family measures its worth by how long its line has fought. Khalid was born into the Banu Makhzum, one of Mecca's proudest clans. Horsemen, archers, and merchants who valued discipline as much as wealth. In that world, reputation was armor. To be brave was to exist. When Prophet Muhammad began preaching in Mecca, Khalid's clan became one of his fiercest opponents. To them, it wasn't just religion, it was rebellion, a threat to Meccan order, trade, and pride. By the time the Muslims marched to Uhud, Khalid's name already carried weight. He wasn't yet a commander in title, but on the battlefield, everyone could see the way his mind worked. The Quraysh wanted revenge for Badr, and Khalid rode to deliver it. At first, the battle went against him. The Muslim archers held the hill and cut down every advance. Then, discipline broke. Some of the archers left their posts, thinking the victory was already won. From his flank, Khalid saw the gap, a narrow ridge suddenly open. He didn't hesitate. He led his cavalry straight through it, striking from behind and turning the tide. That single move changed the day. It's remembered as the moment the Muslims lost their footing and were forced to retreat. Even Muslim chroniclers, who later honored him as a companion of the Prophet, wrote that Khalid's maneuver at Uhud was brilliant, not from affection, but from respect for skill. He was a soldier before anything else, and soldiers know genius even when it stands across the field. For Khalid, that victory confirmed what he already believed, that wars were won by nerve, speed, and timing, not by faith or chance. But time tests every certainty. As Islam grew stronger, Khalid saw something he couldn't dismiss. He saw the same discipline he had once used to win, now mirrored in the very men he had fought. He saw unity where he expected fear, conviction where he had once seen weakness, and it made him question, what kind of belief could make men stand like that, even when defeat seemed certain? Some historians say his change came slowly, born from what he saw rather than what he heard. Others place it later, after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, when peace left room for thought. Whatever the moment, it wasn't sudden. It was the kind of change that happens when a man who has mastered control begins to understand that true strength isn't control over others, it's control over himself. If you had stood beside him at Uhud, you'd have seen a man ruled by instinct. If you had stood beside him a few years later, you'd have seen a man ruled by conviction. There was no single moment of revelation for Khalid, no flash of light, no voice from the sky. Change came quietly, like sand shifting under wind, until one day he found the ground different beneath his feet. By 628, Mecca's wars against Prophet Muhammad were fading. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah had brought an uneasy peace, and in that stillness, Khalid began to watch instead of fight. He had seen the Muslims hold firm against odds that should have broken them. He had seen their patience when victory didn't come, their unity when fear might have divided them. It reminded him of the discipline he had always valued, but now it was bound to faith, not pride.
He began to wonder what kept them standing when every strategy should have failed. It wasn't numbers, it wasn't skill, it was conviction, something deeper than the tactics he had lived by. Soon after, Khalid left Mecca for Medina.
The reports say he arrived with Amr ibn al-As and Uthman ibn Talha, both, like him, men who had once stood against the Prophet. When they reached Medina, Prophet Muhammad didn't meet them with anger. He welcomed them like brothers who had finally come home. No long speech, no ceremony, just a few quiet words of acceptance and a sense that something long unsettled had finally come to rest. From that moment, Khalid's discipline had a direction. The same steadiness that had once fought against faith now began to serve it. Not long after, a message reached Medina. A small Muslim army sent north to Mu'tah had lost its leaders, Zayd ibn Haritha, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, and Abdullah ibn Rawaha, all killed facing a far larger Byzantine-backed force. The lines were breaking. Khalid was among those sent to reinforce them. When he arrived, the battlefield was chaos. Tired men scattered into small groups, fighting only to survive. There was no command, no center, no plan left standing. He stepped forward without being asked. No one appointed him. He simply saw what needed to be done. He gathered the remnants, reformed the lines, and began a controlled withdrawal, so measured that even the enemy hesitated to follow. He wasn't trying to reclaim victory. He was trying to save what could still be saved. That night, it's said he broke 9 swords in combat. But the battle's worth wasn't in the weapons. It was in the order he restored when everything around him had already fallen apart. When word of Mu'tah reached the Prophet, he didn't call it a defeat. He called it leadership. And it was then, according to the early sources, that he gave Khalid a new name, Saif Allah, the Sword of God. A name not born from destruction, but from restraint. Not from conquest, but from control. For Khalid, that day defined what strength truly meant. It wasn't the power to destroy. It was the calm to hold steady when the world turned to panic. If you had stood among those men at Mu'tah, you would have seen fear turning back into discipline under a single voice. And if you had looked at Khalid ibn al-Walid, you would have seen a commander who had finally found a purpose equal to his skill. Not conquest, but service. When the Prophet passed away, Arabia trembled. For some tribes, loyalty had been to the man, not the message. Others feared what Medina's growing reach might mean for their independence. Across the peninsula, new leaders rose, some claiming prophecy, others claiming freedom. The Caliph, Abu Bakr, saw it for what it was, rebellion. He sent men to hold together what belief had built. Khalid's orders were clear: restore unity, no matter how long or hard the road. But that road was lined with hesitation and blood. He fought through Najd, Buzakha, Ain al-Tamr, each place with its own kind of resistance, its own version of truth. But the hardest came at Yamama. There, Musaylima, the self-proclaimed prophet, had gathered thousands behind him. The battle that followed was chaos, tribe against tribe. Men who had once prayed together, now facing each other as enemies. The ground turned slick, and the air filled with verses shouted in anger and grief. When it ended, Musaylima was dead, but so were hundreds of the Prophet's companions, many of them Hufaz, men who had memorized the Quran. Their loss would later drive Abu Bakr to preserve the text in written form. Even in victory, something felt stolen. Khalid had won, but the cost was so high that triumph sounded hollow. Later chroniclers praised his brilliance, the speed of his marches, the precision of his strikes, how rebellion was crushed before it could grow. But if you look closer, Yamama left a shadow. It was a necessary battle, and yet a terrible one. The kind that leaves a man quieter afterward. One story from that time refused to fade. Malik ibn Nuwayra. The records disagree. Some say Malik withheld his taxes and leaned toward the rebels. Others say he was simply waiting for clarity, not rebellion. But after Khalid arrived, Malik was executed. The decision tore opinions apart, even among the companions. Umar was furious and demanded justice. Abu Bakr defended Khalid, saying his intention had been unity, not personal gain. The truth remains tangled in the reports, impossible to pin down completely. Even its strongest commanders stood inside that uncertainty. When the Ridda Wars finally ended, Arabia held together again. Trade returned. Letters traveled freely. The land grew quiet. But among those who had fought, there was no celebration. They had seen how belief could unite and how easily it could divide. For Khalid, it was another kind of lesson. Victory could protect faith, but it could also test it. He began to speak less. He was still the same commander, precise, unshakable, but something in him had changed. He had seen too many banners raised in the name of certainty, and he understood that sometimes certainty itself can be the most dangerous weapon on the field. When Arabia finally quieted, another horizon opened. To the east lay the Sasanian Empire, old, powerful, and already cracking under the weight of its own pride. Caliph Abu Bakr sent Khalid to the frontier, not to build an empire, but to keep one from spilling into Arabia. It was the first time the Muslims faced an army shaped by centuries of war, soldiers in heavy armor, ranks drilled in formations older than Islam itself. The Persians expected this desert army to break at the sight of elephants and iron lines. But Khalid didn't study enemies. He studied ground. He could read the land like language, the tilt of a riverbank, the drag of wind across sand, the point where thirst begins to command more than reason. The first encounters ended quickly. Villages fell not through destruction, but through exhaustion. His army moved lighter, struck faster, and never fought by the enemy's rhythm. Then came Walaja. The Persians outnumbered him badly. Chroniclers wrote that Khalid held them in the open plain until two hidden wings swept around the ridges and closed from both sides. Whether every detail happened exactly that way or not, one truth endures. Walaja broke the Persian line completely. Later historians compared it to Kani, the perfect double envelopment. After Walaja came Ulays, remembered as the River of Blood. Some said the current ran red for days. Modern historians call that an exaggeration, but not the fury behind it. Ulays shattered Persian defense in the south. Then came Hira, the heart of the region. It didn't fall by fire, but by words. Khalid met its leaders face to face, offered them safety in exchange for allegiance and tribute, and kept his word. No looting, no humiliation. For people used to conquerors who ruled through fear, this restraint felt new. His soldiers noticed too. In Hira, people began calling him Al-Muthana al-Sadiq, the honest conqueror. It was a name that traveled faster than his armies. He wrote to Abu Bakr often, brief, factual, never proud. When new orders came telling him to leave Iraq and march west towards Syria, he didn't question them. He gathered his men, looked east one last time, and began the march that would become legend. Hundreds of miles across desert, no roads, no shade, no map worth trusting. He rationed water among camels, drove them until the last drop, and pressed on through heat that turned breath into pain. The distances differ in the records, but the truth doesn't. They made it. They reached Syria alive, organized, ready to fight again. For the men who followed him, that march became something they spoke of in quiet tones, not as glory, but as proof of what trust and discipline can carry when the world gives you nothing else. And for Khalid, it was another lesson written into the sand, that the hardest battles are not against armies, but against the limits of endurance. The road west led him to Syria, a land of fortresses, rivers, and empires that still believed their walls could outlast time. The Byzantine legions were no tribes. They were professionals, hardened by centuries of war, funded by gold, and confident in their strength. To them, the armies coming out of Arabia were a desert tide that would soon dry up. They misread what Khalid had built. His men moved faster than rumor, held formation like instinct, and carried unity as if it were a weapon. At Damascus came the first true test. The city's walls were high, its gates strong, its garrison certain of relief. Khalid didn't storm it in fury. He surrounded it with patience. Days became weeks. Inside, the defenders prepared to endure. Outside, his men cut supply lines and waited, never breaking order. When Byzantine reinforcements arrived from the north, Khalid divided his forces, met them in open ground, and broke them cleanly, then returned to the siege. When Damascus finally sought terms, he accepted them, safety for life and property. In that moment, Khalid faced a choice between pride and principle. He chose principle. That decision meant more than conquest. It proved that true command is not only control over men, it's control over yourself. Then came Yarmouk, August 636, a wide plain split by ravines between Syria and Jordan. The Byzantines gathered everything they had left: Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, and Arab allies, a coalition so vast that even Muslim chroniclers described it with awe. Opposite them stood Khalid, fewer in number, a force drawn from scattered tribes still learning to trust one another. The battle lasted 6 days. Each dawn began with prayer. Each night ended in dust, blood, and exhaustion. The Byzantines had numbers. Khalid had unity. He rode constantly through the lines, leading where needed, reorganizing when formations began to falter. Across the valley, the Byzantine general Vahan struggled with what Khalid understood best: that numbers mean nothing when command is divided. By the final day, a sandstorm swept the field. In that chaos, Khalid saw his moment. He launched the final push, a sweeping strike that broke the Byzantine line and drove them toward the ravines. Their retreat turned into collapse. Yarmouk decided the fate of Syria. Byzantine power there was finished. When the dust settled, the field went quiet. No cheers, just breathing. Khalid prayed, then ordered that the wounded be treated before himself. What his men remembered most was not the scale of victory, but the discipline that made it possible. He had taken tribes bound by impulse and turned them into an army that moved as one. And in that unity, Khalid ibn al-Walid found what he had been chasing for years: proof that strategy wins battles, but only faith and restraint can hold an army together. After Yarmouk, the Caliphate's banners spread across Syria. City after city pledged allegiance. Roads that once divided empires now carried letters sealed in Medina. And among the commanders who made it possible, none carried more certainty than Khalid ibn al-Walid, the man whose name had come to mean victory itself. But certainty can become dangerous when it rests on one man's shoulders. He feared that the soldiers' confidence was becoming tied to Khalid's presence. To Umar, that belief, even born from admiration, was a risk to faith itself. He wanted to remind them that triumph and defeat come only by God's will, not by the strength of any one commander. His concern was not envy, but faith, to keep the army's trust anchored in principle, not personality. So, Umar sent his order, brief, direct, in 2 letters simultaneously. One to Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, naming him the new commander, and another to Khalid ibn al-Walid, releasing him from command but keeping him in service. When the messages reached Syria, Abu Ubaidah's letter arrived first. When the campaign was over, he sent for Khalid, handed him the Caliph's message, and said simply, "This has come from Medina." Khalid read the order, folded it once, and replied, "You are the commander, as the Caliph has ordered." No protest, no pause. He finished his duties as though nothing had changed and joined the ranks under Abu Ubaida's banner. Not long after, Khalid's own letter arrived, confirming what Abu Ubaida had already told him. Abu Ubaida, moved by his humility, refused to let his experience go to waste. He made Khalid his chief field commander, the strategist whose counsel guided every campaign that followed. That quiet moment carried farther than any of his victories. For the men who witnessed it, strength was redefined. They learned that greatness isn't only the power to command, it's the discipline to obey when pride tempts you not to. When news of his removal spread through the camps, confusion followed. Some wept, others wanted to petition the Caliph, but Khalid forbade it. "I fight for God, not for position," he told them, and they obeyed, because they had seen that truth in him long before they heard it. Later, when Umar met him face to face, he said, "I did not remove you out of anger or mistrust, but so people would know victory comes from God, not from any one man." Khalid accepted it calmly, as if he had known it all along. He asked for no defense, no reinstatement, no praise. He simply went back to duty, the sword now sheathed, but still sharp. Years later, historians discuss that decision, each offering their own reasoning. But the moment itself told a clearer truth. Khalid stayed in Syria. He still fought when called and advised whenever counsel was sought. Under Abu Ubaida's command, he led detachments in the final campaigns that secured northern Syria, including the capture of Kinasrin, his last recorded battle. When that city surrendered, the long war was over. Khalid laid down his sword and chose to remain in Homs. Khalid's house was simple. No riches, no guards, no signs of show. Just a few weapons, a saddle, and the clothes of a soldier. For a man who had changed the fate of nations, that simplicity was the truest measure of his greatness. There were no banners waiting for his orders now, only prayer, teaching, and the company of soldiers who still visited to pay their respects. When he walked the streets, people still whispered his name. Those who knew him said he seemed content, even though the world saw him as stripped of power. He never asked to be restored. When duty called, he still served. When peace returned, he stepped aside. It wasn't retreat, it was peace earned through discipline. In his final years, he often reflected on the blades he had broken in battle. And one night, speaking to a friend, he looked at his hands and said, "I have fought in 100 battles, seeking death in every one, and here I die in my bed." But what he didn't see was that his final battle had already been fought. Obedience had been his last test, and he had passed it. In 642 CE, at about 58 years old, Khalid fell ill and died quietly in Homs. Those who loved him built a tomb nearby, and through centuries of rebuilding, it has remained a place people visit. When news reached Medina, Caliph Umar wept. He had relieved him of command, but he had never doubted Khalid's sincerity. He is said to have murmured, "May God have mercy on Abu Sulaiman, Khalid. What women will bear another like him?" That grief was not political, it was personal. Two men, one who ruled through command, the other through obedience, had carried the same burden in different ways. And both had proven that true strength is not found in power, but in restraint. He left behind no speeches and no monuments, only the memory of a man who understood power, served truth, and knew when to set both aside. History remembers him as the sword of God, undefeated in battle, unmatched in command. But those who look closer see something deeper, a man who could obey at the height of power and walk away without bitterness. And perhaps that was his greatest victory of all. In the end, Khalid ibn al-Walid's story is not about conquest. It is about what a man becomes when conquest ends. He proved that strength isn't measured by the size of an army, but by the steadiness of the one who leads it. He fought without fear, obeyed without pride, and accepted without resentment. He lived by discipline, the kind that endures even when victory no longer calls your name. Every empire that once feared him has faded, but the lesson he left endures. The hardest victory is not over enemies, but over the self. He died without a crown, without wealth, without command. Yet his name remains, not for the wars he won, but for the pride he laid down when obedience called. And that is why history remembers him, not only as the sword of God, but as the warrior who obeyed even at his peak.